Box Team asks, after reading the last chapter, it seems Saitama inadvertently sacrificed Syrochi to summon God. Could this be the catalyst to Blast eventually finding out and attacking Saitama? So I don't think Saitama activated the ritual to summon God. I mean, he could have, but I don't think he did. Now, what I think is going to happen is in the next redraw chapter, we're going to see Orochi still on the altar. You know, he climbed up there after getting punched by Saitama. And maybe it will trigger the ritual to begin, but then God will be like, you're not strong enough. Because like Saitama's punch nerfed him into his deathbed, so I'm assuming he's not as strong as he once was. And then God's like, maybe, but I can give you the ability to become stronger. And then he does some God magic to him, and Orochi turns into the goop that we saw back in chapter 127. And I think that's why they decided to have Orochi be in that form, because it's going to connect back to their eventual redraws and retcons. Because before this, Saitama originally just, defeated Orochi, and we saw the top of his head fall to the bottom, and then 19 chapters later he just randomly comes back as this Orochi's heart, and we just assumed, oh, this is just one of Orochi's abilities, I guess. But God giving him this ability not only clears that up, but it also clears up why Psycho saw God in her vision when she initially fused with Orochi to become Syrochi. Because in chapter 132, when Psychos was talking about it, it kind of just happened out of nowhere at that point. We didn't know why that triggered her to see a vision of God. We just assumed that he randomly just chose her at that point in time. But now, with God giving Orochi these powers, it makes sense that she's going to see God once she fuses with Orochi. And another thing that it clears up is what she also says in chapter 132. When she's referring to Orochi's meat root ability, she says, I would use this power to absorb all living creatures through these roots and fuse their spirits into a single entity. And I always thought that was odd because she was kind of implying that that ability comes from God, but originally we saw that Orochi had that ability already. So it didn't really make sense that she was referring to this as a power that came from God. But if God does in fact give Orochi these abilities, then that dialogue winds up making more sense. I even think it's very possible that God allowed Syrochi to come to be just so that she could be a potential sacrifice to bring him back, maybe. Scottish Wolf asks, since we know that Rover more so follows the strongest rather than good versus evil, is he going to stay with Saitama for good, or will he eventually turn on him like Black S? So this is a good question, and it kind of seems it's being set up both ways, in my opinion. We see Rover being taken care of, the A-class roommates that Saitama has, and overall acting like a good boy, I guess. But then on the other hand, we see Black S doing up something in the background, and he seems to be including Rover into his machinations. So I guess it's 50-50 at this point as to what's going to happen with Rover. Jimmy P asks, where do you go to procure your vast information on animes and manga? So you mean news when things are coming out, or what's going to happen and whatnot? Twitter and Reddit is your best bet for that kind of information. But if you're talking about information on the actual series, I mainly just get it from reading the pages themselves, and if I really need to, I'll go to the wiki. Samurai asks, do you think Blue will die? I don't think so. I think it's more likely that maybe Blast would die, sacrificing himself against God. I know that's looking way too far into the future, but just for some reason I feel like Blast would succumb to that fate. Mainly because he's a super cool character, and usually those kinds wind up dying, but I think Blue will live and maybe even become an S-class hero in the future. Del Monte asks, how do you think the Uzman versus Covington 2 fight will go, and who are you rooting for? So I'm rooting for Uzman. I've definitely become a fan of his since he's really come into his own in his title reign. But I think the rematch will be similar to the first one, and Uzman will win for sure. Maybe a decision this time. First Wolf asks, do you think My Hero will introduce a foreign knockoff version of All Might, similar to how Russia tried to make their own Captain America with Red Guardian? So I guess it's possible that the hero that we see in the front of the silhouetted international heroes could be the Russian All Might, but I don't know. It's really up in the air at this point. I don't think the My Hero Russians would try to make an All Might, going about it in the Nomu sense. If anything, he would have to have a quirk similar to All Might, I suppose, or at least just a superhuman strength. Little Ferrari asks, which version of Saitama versus Orochi do you prefer? So I guess I'm about equal on both of them. I was never too high on the original one anyway. It always kind of felt a little too brief and slightly anticlimactic to me. So this redraw is fine. I mean, yeah, we're missing out on some more epic moments, but I think it's overall better for the story.
I mean, I'm gonna miss seeing Orochi doing the water stream and all the other cool stuff that he does. And also, I'm kind of disappointed that they missed out on this opportunity to possibly show Orochi using Goketsu's moveset. A couple years ago on Rada's stream, somebody suggested to him that maybe this could be a possibility. You know, considering that Orochi is like the martial arts genius and picked up on Garo's water stream instantly, naturally that meant that he probably would have did the same thing to Goketsu when he encountered him. And Murata said that that was a good idea and he was going to run it by one, but then I think he said that maybe they weren't going to do it, and I guess they ultimately decided on that since we don't see it. But this new Lovecraftian form is fine, I guess. It's just that maybe it would have been a little better if they included with this new sequence, like, you know, an extended fight scene, and then Orochi goes into the exposition or something like that, maybe.
Sapad B asks, which version of Orochi do you think is more powerful? I personally feel like the old version. So both are kind of like around the same level, I guess. Although the new version of Orochi has the superior feat, in my opinion, with the Gaia cannon. Although maybe it's possible that the old version of Orochi could do that too. Although, you know, we don't know if he could suck up the Earth's core with his tail like the new one does. John H asks, here's the big question, is Ida top 10 level after chapter 321? So by top 10, do you mean in the series with heroes or just within class 1A? Because I think he's definitely top 10 within class 1A, but overall and even just heroes in general, I don't think he's quite top 10 yet, because he was getting a lot of assistance to be able to catch up with Izuku. While that still is pretty impressive, I don't know if he's that strong yet, but within class 1A, he pretty much is. L asks, Murata is very talented, but he's not the creator or mind behind One Punch Man. One is, Murata is just the artist. Yeah, I guess that's just like a common misconception within the community, and it's understandable, especially if you're just like a casual fan. You would naturally think that the artist of the series is, you know, the guy writing it as well. But, you know, sometimes with manga, that's not the case. And with this series, we have artist and writer separated, with one writing it, you know, starting with the original webcomic. He also went on to make Mob Psycho 100 as well. And then we have the artist, Murata, who also drew Ice Shield 21. I honestly don't know if this will ever unanimously be cleared up, at least in the Western fandom. Zack Attack asks, Metal Bat just straight up vaporized those 10k Black S while barely being pumped up. Is it just me, or was this way out of his power range? Has he gotten some kind of Zenkai boost? So maybe it's possible he got a Zenkai, but I don't think he did. I think he's just maybe a little bit stronger because one wanted him to be coming into this part of the arc, maybe. But I also don't think the 10k Black S are really that strong. Considering that Black S is like 11 trillion, or at least in the webcomic he was, then 10k doesn't really seem to be all that powerful compared to that figure. So I think this is totally within Metal Bat's power range to accomplish this feat. Jared B asks, with the new redraws of Orochi, it has me thinking of Drive Knight's inclusion to the Syrochi fight, because when we first saw it, it seemed very out of place. Do you think the sample Drive Knight took might have any traces of God's power inside? Now, before I go any further, let me just say, majority of the stuff I'm going to be talking about here is not confirmed, but in my opinion, I think most of this probably turn out to be true. So as I talked about in last week's Q&A video, I think that one of Murata are going to finish off these redraws with it showing God either talking to Orochi or maybe just silently giving him powers. Because we saw at the end of the redraw of chapter 115, he was basically on his deathbed crawling up to the altar, seemingly not strong enough to be able to resurrect God or just complete the ritual. So then maybe that leads to God giving him power so he can become stronger. But regardless, this is all just going to boil down to God being incorporated into Orochi, which is what I also talked about, gives an explanation as to why Psycho sees that vision of God when she fuses with Orochi. So fast forward a little bit, we saw Drive Knight successfully take some of Orochi's cells, and then he pieced out of there. So like I said, if God does in fact give Orochi his powers, so I guess that means that a part of him or his powers, in theory, should be a part of the cells that Drive Knight has. Now, I've always assumed that Drive Knight took these cells from Orochi in order to benefit the organization, because I still believe that Drive Knight is secretly a part of the organization and also straight up up the Mad Cyborg. And as we've seen in the webcomic, the organization has recycled monsters and turned them into like powerful cyborgs and stuff like that. So I'm assuming Drive Knight is going to try to do the same thing, but use these Orochi cells to like recreate him, but also making him a cyborg in the process. So I guess we're eventually, in the manga's continuity, going to see a big Franken-cyborg Orochi. I think this is going to play into the overall larger narrative of the series, because as we also saw in the Chapter 115 redraws, that Orochi was essentially prophesized to be the ultimate sacrifice to bring God to Earth. And as I'm going to talk about in a future video about the prophecy and everything, it's very likely that God influenced Psychos to make Orochi so that he could be the sacrifice to bring God back. And I wouldn't be surprised if God does the same thing to Drive Knight. Like either straight up directly talks to him and says, hey, you know, make this Orochi monster guy and I'll help you or whatever. I don't think he's going to straight up tell him the true motives to him wanting Orochi to come back. Or he doesn't talk to Drive Knight and maybe just subtly or subconsciously or some way influences him to make Orochi, and then one way or another it leads to the altar coming back, and I don't know, somehow the new Franken cyborg Orochi gets on the altar, and then that successfully brings God back. Maybe, I mean, we're jumping way into the future and passing through so many possible plot lines or story points that could lead to that, and also that could lead us into the final arc of the series, because I do think Drive Knight is going to be the second big bad of the series and like the overall final boss of the second big saga, because it looks like One Punch Man is kind of being set up the way that Dragon Ball Z was. Like there's going to be 3 big long sagas with many arcs within them, and then the 3 big villains or antagonists to headline those arcs. So like the first big part of the series, the antagonist was Garo, kind of like Frieza, and then the second, I think it's going to be Drive Knight, you know, with the Neo Heroes organization, that whole big long arc, kind of like Cell. And then the third one is going to be God, kind of like Boo, and then the whole big God arc, the final arc of the series. So Drive Knight accidentally sacrificing Orochi to bring back God, I think would be a pretty cool way to end the big second part of the series and lead us into the third part. Sean H asks, so apparently Bleach is getting a continuation, and not just a new anime season, a full-blown manga continuation. What are your thoughts? I'm just starting Bleach too. So I obviously knew that the anime was coming out sooner or later, and I was looking forward to that, but I had no idea that it was coming back to Jump. Like, I literally found this out yesterday. After I found out, I read the chapter, and I gotta say, it's pretty great. Like, once you get past the slice of life fan servicey stuff that takes up like 3/4 or like 3/5 of the chapter, it gets pretty interesting, and I think it's a really good return to form for Kubo here. Like, it seems like he has the hunger again, like sitting on the sidelines these past 5 years watching all these new series come and, you know, crush it, while also at the same time the Western fandom, not so sure about the other fandoms, but, you know, talking crap on Bleach and the ending of it and everything. So maybe that lit a fire under Kubo, and he was like, hey, you know what, guys, I'm not done. I could still do this. I still got a lot left in the tank, and yeah, I'm really on board with it. I'm really liking the Hell stuff, and I'm about 80% sure that I'm going to be able to cover this arc on the channel. And I say 80% because I need to reread all 600 chapters of Bleach in like 2 weeks, so that's quite the task, and I'm not sure if I have it in me, but I think I could do it. Zack Attack asks, we know that monsterization affects physical abilities, but would it affect supernatural abilities like King's Metalluck or Fighting Spirit? If so, what if King became a monster? But I think this is a difficult question to answer because we fully don't understand how things work with King. I mean, we do know that the monster cells can affect supernatural abilities. I mean, we've seen them give Chose the energy stuff, but then we also saw it affect Volton, who inherently had some kind of electric abilities. Like, I don't think it was equipment that was giving it to him, because it's implied in one of the OVAs from season 2, I think 3 or 4, that Volton does in fact have like powers. After he took the monster cells, it just made him a stronger version of what he originally was. So it's possible that if King does eat the monster cells, then it does that to him, and it just makes him truly menacing and intimidating intimidating and scary looking, and maybe it alters his abilities so that just all bad luck happens to everyone except him, maybe. Dino W asks, thoughts on Black Widow? So I actually haven't seen this yet. I heard it was coming to Disney Plus, like, no extra charge in October. So I'm totally fine with waiting for it until then. I'd probably be way more interested in watching this if Nat wasn't dead, because it seems like if this is going to have an effect on the MCU, it's going to be a little one. And I have watched and read some reviews on this, and it just seems like, it's just a fine movie, nothing great or anything. So I'm fine with waiting. Delamonte asks, who do you like more, Colby Covington or Conor McGregor? So, like, two of the biggest heels in MMA. I guess I like Conor more, just because he's more entertaining, I guess. But that doesn't mean that Colby's not entertaining. Obviously, they're both very entertaining on the mic, and I think Colby is an entertaining fighter too. I mean, I just personally appreciate that, like, super aggressive, grinding wrestler striking style that he has. But Conor, on the other hand, it's like a full-blown glass cannon. Like, he's either going to win spectacularly or lose spectacularly. Nate Dogg asks, do you think that maybe the reason All For One knows so much is because he jumped into a different timeline that he already lived/saw? More of just a random thought, because there's not really anything to show that he did that. So Nate Dogg, I guess it is a possibility that he did that. But maybe it would just be a little, problematic to introduce like time travel or multiple timelines or multiverse stuff at this point in the series. And I know we also have the whole thing riding with the second user possibly being in like the time travel Bakugo and all that stuff. But at this point, it seems like probably not the case anymore. But I guess All For One just knows everything because Horikoshi suddenly decided that he just wanted to ham-fist that aspect of him into the story, or he's just really trying to hammer it home that he's been alive for a very long time, so he has experience, and maybe he has like some kind of super intelligence quirk. Little Ferrari asks, thoughts on Suicide Squad? I just saw it and really enjoyed it. Would love to see James Gunn make another. So I did see it, and I thought it was fine. It was a little weird and kind of all over the place tonally, and it takes a lot of swings, and not all of them hit, but some of them do. And I think there are some legitimately funny moments in it. But I think this movie is just a little too James Gunny, if that makes sense. Like, it seems like DC gave him more creative control than even Marvel did. And maybe because of that, it was a little too ambitious and maybe didn't hit all of the notes that it was trying to. But I do think it's a step in the right direction for the future of comic book movies. And I think it's obviously better than the original one. Katsuki Level Rage asks, did you know there is a Shrek and Armin ship? It's the first thing that comes up when you type Armin X. No, I didn't know about this, but let's try it out. So it's not the first result for me, but it is the sixth. And yeah, would you look at that? This is in fact a thing. There's even some Wattpad fan fiction, such as Sleepless Nights. Armin's in love with Shrek Senpai, and he just can't stop thinking about him. Will Shrek Kawaii Sugoi Senpai accept his love? Or does Armin need to leave his swamp? And then we have another Shrek X Armin, the crossover. Shrek feels sad, but why? He misses his dear friend Armin because he hasn't seen him in months because of Corona. Oh no, Armin. But yeah, I guess I'll be looking into this from now on. Thanks, Yagi. Why do you think one is revealing so much this early? We're seeing Metal Bat come back, Brave Giant, Drive Knight's display of power, the Psychic Sister arc reveals, a Mind Mask's true nature, and a lot of God and Blast stuff. I feel like there won't be as much content for the upcoming arcs post-Monster Association. So I know you're not asking if the series is going to end soon, Jared, but this reminds me of a lot of the questions I've been getting, especially throughout this year. So I just want to use this video as a way to explain why things are being set up the way that they are, and why also the series is not ending anytime soon. So first of all, I think all of these new developments through the redraws and the retcons and the new story adaptation that we see through the manga's continuity is all for the sake of strengthening the story for the ever-expanding audience, I guess. Because honestly, all of this stuff has already been established. Like, you can go back and reread all of season 1 or even watch it, and literally every single storyline for the rest of the series was set up within that time span. However, a lot of it was subtle, and you really wouldn't pick up on it unless you were like a super hardcore fan. And I think either one himself or maybe somebody from his team discovered that and gave him some feedback and was like, hey, you know, maybe this is a little too subtle, and it's probably a good idea to expand this stuff early on so people will fully understand where the series is headed. Because as an audience audience grows, it's bound to get more and more normies or casuals, since they always make up the majority of a fandom or a community or something. And with this influx of, casuals or normies, you're gonna have people that don't pick up on those subtleties like the hardcores do, meaning that they're probably going to lose interest in the series because they don't really understand what's going on, or they don't see its projected future. So in order to mitigate that, I think one has decided to be less subtle about his storytelling. So that's why I think we see all of these storylines being way more apparent at this point. And then brings me to the other part of your question. It doesn't seem like there won't be much content for the upcoming arcs post Monster Association, and I honestly think quite the opposite. There's actually almost too much content for the upcoming arcs, because after this we're going to be going into the ninja stuff, the Neo heroes, the organization. That's going to take up the second third of the series in my opinion, and then the last third is going to be like all of the god stuff. And like I said, all of that stuff was set up in the first season, but just a little too subtly. So now one is strengthening that and giving everyone a reason to be excited for the rest of the series rather than just like the hardcores. So One Punch Man is not ending soon. It's not ending at the end of this Monster Association arc. It's not going to end with Saitama fighting Garo, or at least in my opinion it's not. Of course there's a chance that it could. Mangakas and Japanese companies make bizarre decisions like that all the time, so maybe. But I have faith that one isn't going to do that. But I'm pretty confident One Punch Man is going to be one of those series that takes a very long time to finish. And not because I want it to. It just feels like that's like a realistic projection for the series. Panda the Man asks, the more series I finish, the more I find that few ever spend more than a chapter or two with the characters post-final battle, and all you see is the protagonist is older and has kids. Some don't even give you that and just abruptly end. I wish we got to see a bit more of certain characters' lives. What do you personally prefer to see at the end of the series you follow? For me personally, as long as the series ends with nearly no stones left unturned, and nearly all of the character arcs happening, and all plot lines reasonably sealed, then I'm fine with it, even if it does end just super abruptly, like an 80s action movie or something. Samurai asks, who would win in a battle between Raid Suits Sanji versus Yamato? So as you're saying, it's a little too early to tell, but right now it seems like maybe Yamato might be a little stronger than Sanji, and that might anger some people, whatever. We don't know for sure yet, I'm just taking a guess. But at the minimum, they're like, I don't know, on the same level possibly, so it would probably be pretty competitive, I guess. Once we see what happens with Sanji versus Queen and Yamato versus Kaido, then we'll, definitely have a better understanding of who could hypothetically win. Adonis G asks, will we see a confrontation with God sooner than we thought? The Saitama versus Orochi redraw showed how God could be summoned to Earth. I'm wondering if this is foreshadowing something in the near future. This is going to happen very far down the line in the story if it does happen. And that's because Orochi has to come back first to be the sacrifice. And in order to do that, I think Drive Knight is going to reconstruct him using the cells that he stole. And that plot line is going to play out during like the Organization Neo Heroes arc, at least in my opinion. And that might be how that arc ends, like accidentally bringing God back somehow, and then that leads us into like the final part of the series. So yeah, it won't be in the near future at all. This is like years from now stuff. First Wolf asks, what are the chances that Izuku's father is a hero operating in another country? I think like less than 20%, and that's because Izuku's whole identity at first was wanting to be a hero, and if his dad was a hero in another country, it would have been pretty weird that they never mention it, especially in the beginning when they talk about his dad. Don't you think it would have came up that, his dad is also a hero? So if it randomly turns out that he is a hero in another country, dare I say it's straight up bad writing by Horikoshi to never even insinuate that this was a thing throughout all 320 plus chapters. Master Kev asks, do you think the American hero is going to introduce an American hero sidekick that resembles Deku? I don't think so, mainly because I think when the American hero along with the other international heroes does come over, I don't think they're going to bring sidekicks with them. The feeling that I get is they're kind of just coming over. I mean, they could bring sidekicks with them, but if they do, I don't think they'll get too much spotlight. And I'm also not sure why they would resemble Deku, unless you're thinking of something that I'm not. Dino W asks, if you were Mark, what order would you want to do these tasks and why? Taking on the Battle Beast, stopping the Sea Squid invasion, or thwarting the Flaxens? So I personally like to do the most difficult things first, so I would definitely take on Battle Beast, and then if I was able to get past him, then take on the Flaxens, and then just take care of the Sea Squid, since they seem like the easiest to probably take care of. Little Ferrari asks, who do you see dying by the end of One Punch Man? I could see Blast sacrificing himself. Yeah, I think Blast is like the top candidate for the good guys to die, but aside from him, Drive Knight is absolutely going to die because he kind of has to, you know, he's like the mad cyborg. But aside from them, maybe Pig God. You know, maybe Pig God sacrifices himself using his secret ability. But other than that, it's anybody's guess, really. It's hard to predict with this series. DJ Monkey 115 asks, don't take this too seriously, but what is the disaster level of Sandy Cheeks? She has crazy feats like karate kicking a giant anchor 510 yards, flipping entire buildings in Bikini Bottom and trying to find SpongeBob. She seems to have genius level intellect, creating shrinking submarines, time travel devices, rockets that can leave the ocean and go to the moon, and she knows karate. That's still not taking into consideration her hibernation form when she's woken up from it. So those are pretty impressive feats, but nothing that I don't think is like god level. Maybe she's like high dragon. I don't know if she's quite above, but you know, dragon for sure, somewhere in there. Delamonte asks, have you seen the theory on how Shaki was a part of the Rocks Pirates and how her and Rayleigh are Mihawk's parents? So her and Rayleigh being Mihawk's parents is definitely out there, but there is like, you know, kind of some compelling evidence to it. I mean, it mostly kind of rides on the fact that Rayleigh has like the same kind of, you know, floral pattern that Mihawk does. And I really wouldn't be surprised if this is what Oda wrote. But the one thing that doesn't make sense is Mihawk's eyes. Neither of them have those eyes, so why does he have it? I mean, there's also the chance that it is a devil fruit, and I'm pretty sure it hasn't been confirmed nor denied that Mihawk does have a devil fruit. I don't think it said it in a Weaver card or something. And obviously it's heavily implied throughout the series that he doesn't have a devil fruit, but his eyes are very peculiar and it is a part of his moniker after all. So I need an explanation for those before I'm sold on Shaki and Rayleigh being his parents. Sean H asks, do you think Hikari's ex mentioned could be Mei Mei? Yes, I do think it's Mei Mei, and I actually talked about this in my 153 review. Is that when that was revealed at the end? I mean, it only makes sense. And like I also said in my review, Gege has been like ending his chapters on characters saying these things that have multiple meanings, and I think that is one of them for sure. You know, that just deepens Hikari along with Mei Mei and just the inner cast, but also raises some questions like how old were they when they were together? Because Hikari is like, what, 17 right now, or 18 maybe, because he got held back, and Mei Mei is like, I don't know, 38 or something. L asks, I haven't liked a lot of the redraws and story changes one has made. 109 was the best yet. What's your opinion of this redraw and the redraws in general? Take care. I think it's unfortunate that the redraws have to happen, and it's definitely taking its toll on the hardcore community for sure, but I think the ends justify the means for sure. And in 2 years, you know, most of the community is going to forget that this was even a thing. It's just going to be something that like the hardcores will boast about in the future. You know, whatever they could say to make themselves feel superior to the others. But I think the redraws serve a very important purpose, and I'm on board with them. The only thing that I don't like is the Disciples and the private military company stuff. So Sean H basically asked if I too thought that Nezu was the traitor, given the developments in chapter 323, but then he watched my videos and saw that I agreed with him, but then he asked if I thought that he was maybe like a proto-Nomu, similar to how Kurogiri was, and also maybe he was even like a sleeper agent, and I'm assuming he means something kind of like a Manchurian candidate. And I'll say yes to the former for sure. I do think that he is something of a Nomu. But as for the sleeper agent stuff, or maybe him being subconsciously controlled, maybe, but he just seems so autonomous about his actions and everything that it would be some super complex subconscious Manchurian candidate type of stuff if that was the case. But it is a possibility. But now I just want to replay all of the Nezu information that I've been talking about for the last 3 days, because it was like broken up into a few videos and it kind of confused some people because of that. Like, I've gotten a few DMs from you guys. So I just want to use this video to compile all of the information of why I personally think that Nezu is the traitor in My Hero Academia. Tokoyami comments that this metal plate structure seems specifically designed to deal with Shigaraki's awakened quirk, which spreads to other surfaces. He asks why the director had already started to set up this plan even before the cultural festival, when there was no such information about his quirk. Nezu says that he just followed his instinct, even without any concrete evidence. He says that even something incomprehensible or unnecessary can be the missing step to reach the end of a challenging path. Oh, is this what I think it is? Did Horikoshi just tell us that Nezu is the traitor? Now, before you get too upset with me, just understand that we're just talking here. I'm not saying it's guaranteed Nezu is the traitor, but what I am saying is that it's odd that Horikoshi has decided to specifically convey this sequence and Tokoyami's dialogue the way that he did. And also, I'm aware that Nezu was one of the suspects for being the traitor. I mean, I've been personally told this many times by you guys. After Tokoyami said this, I backtrack, and it's all kind of making sense, unless I'm like giving myself confirmation bias. But let me just lay it out for you. And of course go over devil's advocate, because there's two sides to this. So before I go into speculation territory, let me just say that it absolutely makes sense that Nezu could literally be following his instinct, because after all, his high specs quirk gives him super intelligence. In fact, in chapter 66, it says it gave him above human intelligence. So, like I said, makes sense that he could come up with this and predict what was going to happen. Why not? But that's boring. Let's try to find a way to make him the traitor. When the traitor or the mole was first mentioned in chapter 83, it's brought up by Present Mic, and it causes like a mild discourse at first. But Nezu says, you know, for what it's worth, I trust all of you, but even I have no way to prove my own innocence, and that totally makes sense. That's something Nezu would say. But then he says, anyhow, the task at hand is to ensure the student's safety. In light of this potential mole, there's something I've been considering for a while now. That is, and then it gets cut off by All Might getting a phone call. And I always thought that was interesting. But given the new information that we have now, it's possible that Nezu was talking about this, you know, reinforced UA security system. So the next time that the mole is being talked about is in chapter 242, and after the teachers have like their pre-war arc little meeting discussion, it come to a panel that says like a few days later, and we see Nezu talking to All Might, and he says they've been in the dormitories for months now, and we've seen no suspicious behavior from anyone. In other words, none of the students are spying for the League of Villains. The next time the League makes a move, assuming we find no connection then. But another interesting thing about this sequence is that when Nezu is saying this, he's looking at a picture of All Might and Tsukauchi. And if we go back to chapter 83, when All Might was interrupted by the phone call, it was Tsukauchi who called him. And let me also remind you that Tsukauchi is also one of the prime suspects of being the traitor, not by me, but by you guys. Now, there's a few other things that I always thought were very interesting about Nezu. Back in chapter 66, when his quirk is being explained, it says, this animal manifested a quirk that gave him above human intelligence. There's no other like him in the world. But going further into his backstory, it says, because of his intelligence, Nezu can perfectly recall anything. As such, Nezu holds grudges from being experimented on, feelings that are exclusive to the human species, which might interfere with his thought processes. So is that a possible clue as to Nezu being the traitor because he wants revenge on all humans, maybe? That's a possibility. But also, if we go back to the whole thing about him being the only one in the world, at first I just thought, hey, that's a cool little quirky thing, and you know, it just shows that, hey, in the My Hero world, you know, there's already anomalies on top of anomalies. Or, more deep speculation, Yujiko created Nezu. I mean, that's not too far-fetched, right? Yujiko is the experimenter dude. It makes sense to me that he would have tried to give an animal a quirk or something. Why not? Which means that Nezu has always been working with Yujiko, and maybe even Suguchi is attached to that too. Maybe not. But also, it begs the question of, okay, so if he is the traitor, then why has he gone through all of this trouble to make this super elaborate fortress? Also, if it's designed to stop Shigaraki, which is hindering his advancement, right? Now, another thing that I've been mentioning through these reviews is how it's been hammered home post-war arc that All For One is this ultra evil genius that has the foresight of everything, and he's like 17,000 steps ahead of Deku and everyone else. Is this one of those things? Did All For One want this structure to be created not to keep him out, but to keep everyone in? I don't know. Too much to speculate about, but I want you to think about this for yourself. Because one thing is for sure, and it's that Horikoshi put this here for a reason. And then Nezu says, UA boasts the greatest defense technology in the whole nation. Its security is comparable to the defense capabilities of Tartarus. And that was already like a red flag right there. We all know what happened to Tartarus. I mean, even the students do, because Momo brings it up immediately. She's like, you know, Tartarus was easily destroyed by Shigaraki. And then Nezu says, UA was also broken into last year. We even witnessed the terror of Shigaraki firsthand. And when he said that, the cogs started moving in my brain again, and I was thinking, like, because UA was like the first, you know, big part of the series, which also was like the catalyst for this whole traitor storyline. Even though it wasn't mentioned until much later on, the seed was certainly planted during this stretch of chapters. I mean, even if you go back to all of the old traitor videos on YouTube, most of their information and clues are coming from the USJ incident. But another thing about those videos is that I would say about 90% of them do not suspect Nezu being the traitor. And hey, understandable, because even your boy definitely did not suspect that. I thought it was Hagakure for the longest time. And it was me thinking about USJ that really sealed the deal for me, because I was thinking like, okay, so Shigaraki breaks into with his, you know, ragtag group of makeshift villains. And I was thinking, okay, so how does that situation get resolved? All Might shows up, Goku style, saves everyone. You know, awesome. One of my favorite moments in the series. One of my favorite moments in any battle manga / anime ever. But then I was thinking, like, why does he show up late? And then it was just, oh my god, he was late because Nezu prevented him from going there. And then I went back and reread chapter 15, and it all but confirms that it was Nezu the whole time, right in front of our faces. So chapter 15 opens up with us seeing All Might like having this internal monologue, and he's like, I can't seem to contact 13 or Aizawa. Good reasons or not, I should put my hero work ahead of teaching. That was quite foolish. What do I tell them when I show up at the end? Anyway, I should be fine in another 10 minutes, thinking that, like, you know, I could just not go to the USA and just show up despite, you know, not being able to get in contact with the other teachers. But then All Might being All Might, it's like, no, what am I thinking? I'm going. And as he's about to go to USJ, Nezu shows up right there at the door and says, hold on. As if Nezu was waiting there the whole time to make sure that All Might wouldn't leave. And what goes on to happen in this sequence is essentially Nezu talk no jutsus All Might into staying and relaxing. Like, he goes out of his way to make sure that All Might does not leave that room. Like, he's softening up the couch, he's getting tea ready for him. And like most of us, I'm sure, when I was first reading / watching this, I just thought, you know, it's just a coincidence. You know, Nezu shows up, he has the best interest in All Might. We assume Nezu himself doesn't know what's going on at USJ. So it's just, you know, like an unfortunate circumstance. Nothing malicious behind it, because, you know, why would we suspect Nezu of being the traitor. But no, this whole time it was quite the opposite. Master Kev asks, with all of the redraws of One Punch Man happening and they're slowly moving away from the webcomic, do you think that when Garo is going to fight Saitama, there's going to be more heroes spectating him other than just Zombie Man, or do you think Zombie Man is still going to be the only one watching Saitama? So originally it wasn't just Zombie Man. It was later revealed that Flashy Flash was somehow still conscious and was able to see that fight. And Amai Mask was also aware of it too. Aside from them, I really wouldn't be surprised if there are more heroes who are able to witness that fight, which gives us more characters who are aware that Saitama is the one above all, or in their own way, because sometimes they don't even truly accept it, such as like Flashy Flash. So given that Metal Bat and Tank Top Master are there now, it's possible maybe they find out or see. L asks, what if it's all a dream and Crablante puts Saitama in a coma? Would it take away from the story in your opinion? So yeah, I would be very upset with that, and if that did happen, in my opinion at least, it would completely ruin One Punch Man. Not just from a story standpoint, but a legacy, the community, everything. It would just be one essentially scorch earthing his own series. Now, is it possible? Sure, but I just don't think he's gonna do that, or at least I hope he doesn't. Nate Dogg asks, you brought up on how Drive Knight might accidentally awaken God, but what if it's on purpose? What if Metal Knight made Drive Knight as an advanced AI combat machine, and Drive Knight was given sentient life by God and gave him actual purpose in life, whereas he didn't have a purpose? The purpose being bring God back to life since he made him sentient. So it is very possible, and I was thinking that, you know, there's more importance to the cubes with the overall story other than just what we've seen so far, and it's possible that Drive Knight or Metal Knight or Kuseno even came across one of these cubes, and it could be like a similar situation with Justice League, where like the Mother Box essentially gave Cyborg his power. So it could be something like that, but as for God intentionally giving Drive Knight sentience for the purpose of bringing him back to life, I just don't understand why, because everything was going according to plan with Orochi, unless God has this crazy foresight as to where he's also establishing these contingencies because he somehow knew that Saitama was going to defeat Orochi and that Drive Knight was going to be there to grab some of the cells and reconstruct them so that like a month later he can bring back Orochi then to be the sacrifice. It's kind of clunky, but ultimately I don't think Drive Knight is AI. I'm very confident in him being a cyborg, meaning that he was originally a human. And of course, you know, my other thoughts, him being the mad cyborg. Now, whether Metal Knight plays a part in that or not is really up in the air at this point, but I just don't think God at least purposely made Drive Knight do this because, you know, like what I said. Chance asks, all the Yonkos with crews and allies versus all Marines, you could do pre-time skip and post-time skip if that changes anything. So if this were to happen, I think all of the Yonkos with their allies would probably destroy the Marines simply because they're so outnumbered, not in just like foot soldiers, but just like powerhouses as well. Because if we go back to Marineford, that was basically everything the Marines had. And just one Yonko crew was pretty competitive against them. So imagine if the red-haired pirates, the Big Mom pirates, and the Beast pirates were there, they would for sure probably win. The only way the Marines would have a chance of overcoming those odds was like somehow getting Prime Garp and Sengoku back. But that's just accounting for the Marines, of course. We don't know what's going on at Marijois. You know, maybe the Gorosei are like all super Yonko level or something. And of course they have Emu, who is probably Rock. So he's like, you know, beyond Yonko probably. Dino W asks, hey, what do you think of the Marvel What If series so far? I think it was pretty awesome. The stuff with Thanos last episode was a lot of fun. Yes, it certainly was. The first episode was fine. It didn't like really excite me or anything. I just thought, you know, it was good, but it didn't really deliver the way that I was expecting like a series with potential like this could until the second episode. And then it was like, wow, this is what this series should be. And man, it really delivered. That episode was so good. And yeah, like you say with the Thanos stuff, coming into the series, that's one of the main things I wanted. I was just like, man, I hope they do like a good guy Thanos type of thing. And they did. I mean, they nerfed the crap out of him, of course. But
I guess you kind of have to, because if you didn't, he could have just single-handedly did everything himself, right? First Wolf asks, what are your overall thoughts on Hikari? I'm really hoping he's around Yuta's level, since his initial introduction suggested as such. Could he still end up being that strong? So I do like Hikari so far. He's much different than I expected him to be. But we still have to see how this Hikari arc fully plays out before I make my final judgment on him, because there's a chance he might go south and his character maybe turns out to be not so cool, but I don't think that's going to happen, but it's a possibility. And I do think that he will probably be seen, at least from the audience perspective, as being around Okotsu's level once we fully understand what his curse technique is. Little Ferrari asks, do you think Vegeta's Ultra Ego form is kind of like Goku's Ultra Instinct Omen form? I feel like there's more to it. I could be wrong though. So I really didn't think about that at first, but I guess it's very possible, and I certainly hope that's the case, because Vegeta does say that he discovered this form mid-fight with Granola because he pushed him to the point of being able to unlock it. Meaning that there's certainly potential there for advancements to it, and if they are trying to play yin and yang between Goku and Vegeta here, then I guess Vegeta would have a same trajectory as Goku as well, meaning that this could be the Omen or the Sign version of, Vegeta's Ultra form. So hopefully after Vegeta eats his Senzu Bean, or at least hopefully he does, and maybe gets a Zenkai, because maybe in the next chapter he gets pushed close to death possibly. And then it's the Zenkai possibly that brings out the mastered Ultra Ego form possibly, and then maybe Vegeta gets his redemption. I'm not gonna hold my breath, but man, I hope. Del Monte asks, how do you think Yome versus Akaza would go? So this is a great question, and I'm sure there's a whole bunch of YouTube videos on this. I haven't checked, but it's just such an intriguing matchup. So on paper, I guess this fight would be pretty competitive, and I guess he would be able to push Akaza even further than Rengoku did. So meaning that Himejima could realistically solo Akaza, but on the other end, Akaza could easily solo Himejima as well. So this is like a pretty compelling matchup, and if I had to bet on it, guess I'd go with Himejima then, maybe? I don't know. Man, it's so close. It's hard to say.
Master Kev asks, do you think the One Punch Man series is going to end once God gets revealed, as he is currently the big buildup for the series right now? Or do you think they're going to find another villain that is possibly above God level? So right now, at least, I don't think so. Pretty sure God is going to be like the climax of the series. And that's because I think One has already pretty much laid out how the entire series is going to play out. And I don't think he's been setting up anything that is going to be above God, besides Saitama. But then again, I guess it's almost like a battle manga trope at this point for like the true main villain to randomly emerge in like the last 20 or 15 chapters of the series. Like they've been fighting this one person who you just assumed was the big bad of the series, but it turns out no, it was secretly this other bigger bad the whole time. So that could happen here, like, randomly towards the end of the series or in the final arc, it's revealed that someone has maybe been pulling God's strings, but I just don't think that's likely. I think once God is defeated, the series is pretty much going to be over at that point. Maybe there'll be like 1 or 2, maybe even 3 slice of life chapters or something wrapping up, the story. And also there's just a possibility that One just continues the story after God has been defeated, and then maybe there is another threat out there above him, but I just don't think that's likely either. It goes back to what I said with him having set up the whole entire story already, and also it's going to take really long to just get to the God stuff and finish it anyway, like 10 years. So I'm assuming that by the time the story is completed, it'll be over. Wolfire54 asks, who do you think is the smartest out of the two, Saitama or Flashy Flash? So I think they're smart in their own ways. I mean, if they took like an IQ test, Flashy Flash would probably have a higher score than Saitama, but I think Saitama has this kind of like integral esoteric wisdom that Flashy Flash couldn't have, because only somebody like Saitama would be able to gather this kind of wisdom from the type of experiences that he's had. First Wolf asks, I recently read that Hikari's curse technique is similar to the power of a character from Hunter x Hunter. Have you heard this information, and if so, what character do you think it could be based off of? So this almost always happens with like Jujutsu Kaisen, and I couldn't find one solid theory on Hikari's curse technique being related to a Hunter x Hunter character. It's like a whole bunch of different characters. So that tells me that still at this point, most most of us don't really have a good idea of what Hikari's curse technique is. I mean, I'm sure there's some people out there who have accurately already guessed what it is eventually going to be revealed to be, but right now I think the majority of us don't really know. Sean H asks, what do you think will happen with Stain and Overhaul? So I know you asked me this question a couple weeks ago, so we obviously didn't know what was going to happen in the latest chapter with Stain and All Might, so that, shows us what the future of Stain is, or at least mostly. There's definitely going to be more to him, but as for Overhaul, I'm not really sure. Last we saw him, he was like being arrested again, right? And he didn't seem remorseful for Eri or anything. It was mainly just him remorseful for the boss, and he kept, talking about the boss, so I wouldn't be surprised if when Overhaul is retouched on in the story, we'll see him like actually come in person with that boss dude. And then I always assumed that his quirk was going to be stolen by All For One or Shigaraki, but All For One saw him with Lady Nagant. He didn't seem interested in his quirk at that point, so if not All For One, then maybe Shigaraki takes it. I just think that's the ultimate destiny for Overhaul. Dino W asks, the Spider-Man No Way Home trailer is out and it looks amazing. If you were Tom Holland's Spider-Man, would you want your identity to be public? So if I was, no. I think that in the Marvel world, at least, should have the right to keep their identities anonymous. I mean, if DJs and luchadors can, then, why can't superheroes? I'm not saying keep your information from the government, because obviously that's impossible, so you'd have to strike a deal with them. Not even going into the Civil War stuff, just something to where they only know and the public doesn't know. Little Ferrari asks, how do you think a fight between Garo currently in the manga versus Orochi would go down? So I still don't think he'd be able to defeat Orochi, because he's kind of fighting on par with Bang, and that's not like an insult or anything. Bang is obviously incredibly powerful, but talking about Orochi here, and if Garo isn't like completely dominating Bang, then I don't think he has a chance against Orochi, especially at his full power. Like, he was holding back against Garo and just completely dominated him previously, so him going all out, like how he did against Saitama, even in the retcons, I don't think the current Garo would be enough to take it down, but Awakened Garo would for sure. L asks, an anime no content creators talk about is Peach Boy Riverside. Are you watching it, or by chance ever heard of it? So I've never heard of this series, and it kind of has a funny name for it being like a dark seinen, and I did look it up and I read the synopsis. It kind of reminds me of Fate Stay Night for some reason, but I probably won't get into this because I'm sure I've told you this before, but I'm just almost exclusively like battle manga. That's really the only stuff that interests me nowadays. DBZXOPM crossover 2021 asks, what are your opinions on the petition for changing the animators for One Punch Man from the website change.org? If you have heard of it, I was just wondering if it's credible or not. So if by credible you mean the people that made it are legitimately trying to change things, then yeah, I'm pretty sure they are. But if you mean credible as in this making a difference, I don't think so. Anyone could make a petition on change.org, and also the Japanese publishing companies are extremely staunch. Like, even if this petition got 1 million signatures and they were made aware of it, I still don't think they would care. Samurai asks, what are your thoughts on the random samurai that helped Yamato out in the new chapter being somewhat related to Zoro? So I think this is pretty much Zoro's dad for sure, and I don't think it takes away from his character, because there was always this quiet significance to Zoro since the beginning of the story. It was only a matter of time before it was going to be revealed, and this is, shown in battle manga anyway. Everyone is going to have some kind of significant lineage or history or greater purpose to their individual world. You brought up Naruto with the Ashura stuff. Well, it's the same thing with One Piece. Luffy is the reincarnation of Joy Boy, which is basically the Ashura of this world. So Zoro being a descendant of the Shimoshi clan doesn't really bother me. I mean, that's the dojo that he was brought up in, so that ties that together. And also it's being heavily implied that he is like the descendant of Ryuma, and obviously he had the whole moment with him at Thriller Bark, so now that ties that together. So it all makes sense, and I think it's awesome in my opinion. Delamonte asks, what's your favorite TV shows that aren't anime or comic related? So I got into this a little bit with your other question on Patreon, but I'll say here that Eric Andre's show is probably my favorite of all time. I think it's like a near perfect show. And I know you said not comic related, but I have to put The Boys out there because it's like my second favorite show right now. Like, I like AEW, like the pro wrestling show, Dynamite that comes on TNT. I think that's just like a good show, like not just a good pro wrestling show. But aside from them, I really don't watch too many shows or like TV. I mainly just watch YouTube. Nate Dog asks, got any favorite voice actors? Personally, I love Sabat and Hiroshi Kamiya. So to be honest, I don't really have any like specific favorites. I like Chris Sabat as well.
He's awesome. But other than that, I don't really like have like individual favorites. I mean, I recognize voices from time to time and I'm like, oh, I like that person. But aside from like Chris Sabat, I don't, no names really come to my mind. Nico L asks, I was thinking, what if Nezu isn't the traitor, since a few things just seem weird about the whole UA barrier thing, as it was described as essentially just a bunch of walls, and if anything gets detected, they could go underground and the whole school will move. To me, that doesn't really sound like it's made to combat awakened decay, but rather regular decay, since as soon as Shiggy started to decay the first set of walls, he would set off the alarm and the school would move, getting everyone out of danger. With how quick awakened decay was shown to be, I feel there's just a little bit of a stretch to think the whole school could move before all of the barriers decay, but I could be wrong. I was also thinking, since it's a very real possibility that the doctor is the one that modified Nezu, did it mean that he was more than likely also the one that Nezu would have a grudge on? So first of all, Nezu says that he was thinking strategically or thinking ahead or something as his excuse for figuring out, awakened decay ahead of time or whatever. And the fact that Tokoyami points it out in that sequence, this all being shown to us, I think is for a reason, and that is to make Nezu suspicious. I think it would be odd if that sequence just ended there and that was just wrapped up and it was just like, oh yeah, Nezu just, figured it out. Just given the original information that he had on decay and that's it. Nothing more to it. That would be weird, right? And as for Nezu having a grudge on Yujiko, I'm not really sure what's 100% going on with Nezu at this point. He could be like a Manchurian candidate or something, or maybe he could be under some kind of hypnosis or something to where he's not like actively being evil, but he's subtly being controlled possibly. And Yujiko's just waiting for the time to fully activate him. Because also we've seen with Kurogiri, he can alter your like personality and your memories. So I wouldn't be surprised if he did that with Nezu, and he made Nezu think that it was other people that experimented on him and not Yujiko himself, and also that way he could just blend in more at UA and not be suspicious if he himself isn't even aware that he's the traitor, you know what I mean? Extinction Team 75 asks, what if Shigaraki would touch Goku in his god form? Would it have any effect? So in my opinion at least, I think that if Goku was touched by Shigaraki with no prior knowledge of what was going to happen, he would probably die, right? I don't see why he wouldn't. Goku has shown vulnerability to things way weaker than DK. Sapad B asks, so we saw Saitama use that serious squirt gun move on Orochi. That was not in the webcomic. Do you think we might see some other serious moves besides the table flip? And if we do, what kind of serious move would you like to see? So Sapad is referring to when Saitama is fighting Awakened Garo in the webcomic. About halfway through the fight, Saitama does what he calls the serious table flip, where he's essentially throwing the ground into the sky along with Garo. And in the webcomic, it's kind of ambiguous how high up he throws him. It's just really high up. And if this sequence comes to the manga, which I think it will because it's pretty iconic in the webcomic, I fully expect Saitama to like throw Garo along with the ground into space. I think he'll probably throw him as far as like the stratosphere or even like the mesosphere. And then I think we're gonna see a pretty cool sequence where Saitama and Garo are fighting in space, going between like the pieces of ground that Saitama threw up there. And then after all of that happens, we see another serious move from Saitama. Once Garo starts evolving out of control, he does the serious headbutt. And this is by far the most, I guess, underwhelming serious move that we've seen so far, because it doesn't have like the same kind of destructive output from the other serious moves we've seen. So I think once we see this in the manga, which I'm pretty sure we will, Murata of course will portray it to be as powerful as it deserves to be. And then I think that might be the last serious move that we see from Saitama, at least in the webcomic. Maybe he does another one afterwards. Honestly, I don't really remember, but clearly that is far from the last serious move he will perform. But as for what I would like to see, well, just a serious kick, I think that's on the way. And I know Saitama very rarely kicks, but I'm pretty sure he'll bust that move out eventually. And the same for like the other serious strikes, like a serious knee, a serious elbow. I'd even like to see like a serious clap, something like maybe like what Hulk does, and then producing like an air impact similar to what we see of like All Might. But obviously it's going to be way more powerful. But speaking of serious moves, I just want to mention something else that I haven't talked about before. I think Saitama does a serious move in the series that we weren't really aware of. Like when he jumps back to Earth after Boros kicks him to the moon, pretty sure that's like a serious jump or something, right? But I'd also like to see him do something like that on Earth. Going back to the Hulk, I'd mainly just like to see him do like Hulk stuff, you know, but like amplified to Saitama standards. Extinction Team 75 asks, did you know that there is a Reddit called r/f Waganma, uncensored title of course? So I kind of knew that this was a thing. I may have heard it somewhere, but I just checked it out and it's actually kind of funny. Some posts are maybe a little too extreme, but most of it seems to be grounded and everybody there mostly has a leveled head. But yeah, if you guys are interested in just purely roasting Waganma, here's the subreddit for you. Sean H asks, what are your thoughts on the latest Record of Ragnarok chapter since you didn't get to make a video on it? So yeah, I was still recovering when that chapter dropped and I was unable to make a review of it, but I did read the chapter and I enjoyed it. And I think the Beelzebub reveal is pretty interesting. It was certainly implied that he may have had something to do with Zero becoming Hadjun, but there wasn't really like any evidence yet. I mean, we had just literally been introduced to that character, I think. But now it being revealed what he had done makes him all the more interesting, especially because we know that he will compete, and that's definitely going to come back into play. And I'm just curious what that's going to be. And I also liked how Buddha used hatred for like the first time since he became a god, I guess. And that had an abnormal effect on his weapon. Like he didn't even know what was going to happen. And I'm really a sucker for that type of stuff. And while the chapter left off in a cliffhanger, I did read the spoilers for the new chapter that just came out. I think the fan translations will probably be out tomorrow. And I'm not going to spoil anything here, but I will say that I know what the end result of this fight is. Jimmy P asks, my question pertains to the upcoming Eternals movie. Why didn't the Eternals here on Earth help Avengers eradicate Thanos and his minions? Because Thanos possesses a deviant gene, and it's the Eternals' primary directive to contain, capture, and kill the deviants. Do you think Thanos' genocide and atrocities were on the behest of a Celestial? So yeah, I think Thanos will for sure get mentioned in this movie because it would be a wasted opportunity if they don't. It's possible that the MCU might explain Thanos as being the son of Eternals. Like when Thanos goes to get the Soul Stone, Red Skull says, Thanos, son of Alars being an Eternal, at least in the comics. So Thanos is pretty much an Eternal himself, but he has the deviant gene in him, which makes him look the way that he does. But I think that's as far as it goes. I don't know if it makes him literally a deviant or gives him like deviant abilities. So that could be like the loophole as to why the Eternals didn't interfere with him. And then also the other thing could be that he was following the will of the Celestials, and that's why Thanos inherently wants to bring balance to the universe, and he's so obsessed with it because it's like in his blood pretty much. Like he is a direct descendant of the Celestials coming from the Eternals, so it would make sense. Dino W asks, are you enjoying the What If series so far? So to be honest, I'm kind of hot and cold with it. I'm interested in some episodes and then some are just kind of boring and I just don't even want to finish them. Now it's super interesting because at the end of the last episode, Ultron Vision or Ultra Vision showed up, and it seems like he's going to be the big bad of this series, to where all of the previous heroes that we've seen in these episodes have to come together and take him down. So I'm totally on board for that, but getting to this point was kind of rocky for me. Little Ferrari asks, what have you been playing on your PS5 lately, if anything? Will you be getting the bigger games coming out like the next God of War? I think that's when I'll get one, whenever the heck they become available. So I kind of feel bad for saying this, but to be honest, I haven't played the PS5 in a couple months. The last thing I played was the DLC for Final Fantasy VII Remake, but I never wound up finishing it. I'll get around to it eventually. But to be honest, there's no games that are coming out soon, I'll say, that are really on my radar. I'm actually kind of interested in Halo Infinite. Depending on how my life is when that game gets dropped, I might grab that and an Xbox. But aside from that, I've kind of just been playing the Switch, like Smash and Pokemon. The Diamond and Pearl remakes come out in November, and I'm definitely going to be playing that. Sean H asks, do you think with the introduction of Star and Stripe, we might get an arc similar to Gojo's past, but for All Might? I would love to see what he did while in America, and of course it would end with the big fight of My Hero Verse that, quite frankly, we need to see. So unfortunately, no.
I don't think we'll get an arc centered around All Might. And honestly, I don't even think we're going to get an arc that just doesn't pertain to the main storyline here. Pretty sure we're on a straight course to the end at this point with no straying away. I'm not trying to dampen anyone's mood here, but I don't think My Hero has much time left. Like, if we're lucky, it'll last like another 9 months maybe. So I don't really see anything else fantastical happening in the story other than it just wrapping up. And we especially will not get an All Might centered arc because All Might isn't really that popular of a character. And not just with Japanese fans, but it just seems like with international too. And I know that kind of sounds weird, but I think on this channel I may have put us into like this echo chamber about how great All Might is because he's my personal favorite character and I think he's one of the best manga characters ever, but I don't think the majority of the fandom agrees with that. So I think at the most we'll get like a couple pages maybe of us seeing like when All Might was the master of Star and Stripe. I mean, I hope we get like a full chapter. That would be cool, but I'm not gonna get my hopes up. Now, as for the connection between Star and Stripe and All Might, well, I mean, it obviously hasn't been made clear yet, and I'm sure it will eventually, but all we can really go off of now is Star and Stripe calling All Might master, and Star and Stripe, of course, being the #1 hero in America, and we know that All Might lived in America for a little bit. We don't know exactly how long because the timelines are never really explicitly made clear in this series. So it's like sometime after he was 18 and All for One killed Nana, he went to America and did a whole bunch of stuff there. You know, he had some time with David Shield and then he eventually came back to Japan. Now, is it possible that during his stay in America that he met Star and Stripe and trained her? Sure. I mean, I guess that's what they're gonna go with, but that also plays into like the ages here because All Might is like, I don't know, in his 50s or something. That's also never been made clear. So I guess he was in America like around 30-ish years ago, maybe 25, something like that. So that also goes into how old is Star and Stripe, and there's no way to know that either, especially just going off of aesthetics because she just looks of ambiguous age. She could be 19 or 45. So depending on that, I guess it's also possible that he went to America multiple times, or maybe Star and Stripe visited Japan at some point and trained with him there. Not saying that's the case, I'm just, you know, putting out some possibilities, just depending on the ages. L asks, animes you're looking forward to this fall, excluding the obvious one. I'm not sure what you mean by the obvious one, but surprisingly this year I have a lot to look forward to because previously I wasn't really too hyped on the fall releases. But we've got Demon Slayer Season 2, which I'm really looking forward to. We've got JoJo Part 6. We've got Attack on Titan, although I think that might be January. And then we have Jujutsu Kaisen Volume 0. So a lot of good stuff coming in the next couple of months, and probably be covering all of it on the channel. You know, pending if I'm, you know, absolutely able to, of course. I don't want to make any promises, but I plan on it. Samurai asks, thoughts on USJ Nomu versus Chimera from the My Hero movie? So Chimera is obviously super powerful. He has like one of the best quirks probably, but still, even at that point, I don't think he has much of a chance of taking down the USJ Nomu because Chimera was ultimately defeated by the students, and the USJ Nomu could have just easily slaughtered all of them with like one strike. And I know there's obviously a power discrepancy and experience between the students that face Chimera and the students that face the USJ Nomu, but I don't think they've improved that much to where it's going to be any different. Like when the USJ Nomu was moving at supposedly top speed or something, it looked like time had stopped from the perspective of the students. And also, you know, just one strike was as powerful as nearly anything that Chimera could do. So in my opinion at least, the USJ Nomu would probably defeat Chimera if they were to one-on-one fight. Nate Dogg asks, will we see All Might fight again? Maybe for the last battle, he'll wear a suit that makes him superhuman. I think everyone would love to see him fight one more time. Call him Iron Might. So I don't think we'll see him fight again. I think at the most, maybe he'll go into his muscular form for like a second to be able to land one punch maybe, but that's about it. And you say, I think everyone would love to see him fight one more time. Well, I don't
think that's the case, and it goes back to what I talked about in the beginning of the video. Not everyone really cares about All Might the way that we do. And I'm starting to think that when All Might inevitably dies, I don't think it's really going to affect the majority of the audience the way that we thought it would. Crazy Iguana asks, have you seen Squid Game yet? The main character is voiced by Greg Chun, Garo's voice actor. Hey, that's cool. I do like Greg's performance as Garo. Yep, I appreciate anime dubs, guys, get over it. But I haven't seen Squid Game, and I probably won't. I'd be more inclined to check it out if it was just a movie, but it's like 10-hour-long episodes. That's so much of a commitment and so much time. Like, how does everybody like instantly watch this as soon as it gets popular? Like, is everyone just staying up all night and watching this so that they'll have an opinion on it? But it seems like the hype has died down for it anyway, and we're all just gonna move on to the next popular topical thing in a couple hours anyway, so you know. Little Ferrari asks, since we got some of Bang's backstory in chapter 150, do you think he could have become a monster like Garo? So I guess it's possible that he could have, but I didn't really get that impression from him. Garo is more so becoming a monster because he's so obsessed with his goal. And I guess him being a fan of the idea of a monster, or at least to him, is probably helping with that metamorphosis, but it didn't seem like Bang had nearly as much of a conviction as Garo did. But all people becoming monsters in One Punch Man obviously isn't created equal. So, like I said, it is possible, but I just don't think as likely as Garo's transformation was. Nico L asks, say you're teleported into the One Punch Man verse, which of the martial art styles are you choosing to train? So I guess the water stream, there's not really like an MMA style, or at least I don't think there is in One Punch Man. And considering that the water stream seems to be the best style, I guess I would go with that. I mean, granted, we have only seen like Ultra Masters like Bang and Garo make it look good, but it does seem pretty cool. Although, in like real life, I'm not really too much into like the traditional martial arts stuff. I'm more of like an MMA guy. Extinction Team 75 asks, looking at the other more unknown heroes of One Punch Man, I learned that Lily is only 15 and in B class. Do you think in the future she could potentially reach A class, considering she is stronger than other older heroes in their prime? I've always been confused with the Blizzard group because they're all like essentially C class heroes, but somehow in the top of the B class. Maybe that has something to do with the politics and whatever pull Fubuki has. And I'm sure they're strong to some extent, but I've just never really been impressed by them. But yeah, I guess Lily could become A class in the future. I mean, she is only 15. I don't see why not. Zapod B asks, do you think that Bang was going to use his explosion release fist and awakening breath when he was preparing to face Eller Centipede? So he for sure was using awakening breath, but I don't think he was using explosion release fist, because we see the stance that he takes before he's about to take on Eller Centipede, and it's not the explosion release fist stance. I guess since Bang knew that he was going to die, he didn't want his last moments to be using that style. Maybe he just wanted to go out using the water stream. Mateo asks, I have a theory. What if Deku had the All for One quirk, but it was stolen by Dr. Garaki? Then we can have the moment that All for One, inspired by Darth Vader, told Deku, I am your father. So I'm actually going to be talking about this in a video that's going to be released soon on the Anime Uproar channel, but I'll talk about it here too. So yes, I do think it's very possible that Izuku may have been born with All for One, and All for One being his father. But as for him being a vessel, I don't think that's necessarily the case, because it was explained to us how he is able to hold All for One, and that All for One itself is just represented as one super powerful quirk and not 7 individual quirks. But him being born quirkless allegedly allows him to have All for One with no drawbacks. But as for him possibly have been born with All for One makes sense, because if we go back to like the very first chapter or the very first episode, Yujiko is hiding in plain sight, and he is specifically chosen to be the one to tell Deku that he is quirkless and shows them the x-ray. Don't you think that's interesting? And also that, you know, like underneath the hospital, he has like a quirk library, and it's like, how did he get all of those quirks? And it's very possible that quite a few of them have come from All for One, just naturally taking them from people throughout the years. But there also is the possibility in theory that he has like this child
quirk theft ring going on, as to where either he's taking quirks from children like as soon as they're born, because I guess it is possible, since the very first quirk discovered was a glowing baby, so I guess you can have your quirk factor like as soon as you're born, and then he can just remove it then. But Izuku being born with All for One could explain how it's being duplicated, because that was never explained. Like, how did 9 get his All for One, and how did All for One get his copy of All for One in the interim when the original one was given to Shigaraki? But why would it be Izuku? Like, why would All for One target Izuku's mom, Inko? Well, that's really like the $1 million question, I guess, going into this theory. But it is mentioned like at least twice, I think, that Inko resembles Nana. And we know that All for One purposely chose Shigaraki because he is the grandson of Nana. So All for One has some kind of like fixation on her, and just One for All in general. And All Might, of course. So it's possible that maybe Inko is like the niece of Nana, maybe, and then Izuku would be her nephew, and also Shigaraki's cousin. But aside from all of that, it could just go back to Horikoshi loving Star Wars, because like what Mateo said, with it just being a parallel to Luke and Darth Vader. Now there's another possibility that maybe if he wasn't born with All for One, then he was born with DK, because Shigaraki is 5 years older than Izuku, and when Shigaraki's DK bloomed, it was when he was 5 years old. And going into that theory, allegedly All for One gave Shigaraki the DK quirk. Like at the beginning of chapter 235, he's dropping him off to his mom, or at least allegedly he is. It's never been confirmed that that is in fact All for One yet, but I'm 100% positive it is. So given that the timeline and the ages line up here, I don't think that it's a coincidence, right? It seems like that could have been purposely done, because it's also said that DK is like a new rare variant quirk that had been discovered. So it doesn't have to be like the telekinesis quirk that Izuku's mom has, or the fire breathing quirk that his dad has, which could just be one of All for One's quirks that we haven't seen yet, allegedly. But in the end, it's a possibility that none of this is true, and Horikoshi just goes in another direction. Zapod B asks, what monster other than Boros would you like to see return from the dead, or at least have some of their design features reused? I really want to see another Withered Sprout. So I bet you do, Sapod. I think you're the #1 ranked Withered Sprout fan in the world. But other than Boros, I'd like to see Goketsu come back. I would have liked to have seen what happened if Goketsu had survived on into like where we are right now in the manga. But even if he were to just somehow come back after this arc, that would be incredible too, even though there's next to like 0% chance of it happening. Little Ferrari asks, do you think King's abilities work on Blast, or do you think Blast is so ridiculously powerful that he could just see King as a normal person? So that's one of the $1 million questions, at least in my opinion, because I've been wondering this myself for a while. I think I maybe even made a video about this last year. But to be honest, I just don't really know. It's a 50-50. I could see Blast seeing King in a similar light that Saitama does, but at the same time, I could also see him just seeing King the way that everyone else does. But maybe less fear and admiration than the others, and more like of a mutual respect type of thing, kind of like how Tatsumaki sees King. I think it's most likely that's how Blast will see him. Awakened Saitama asks, if Silverfang uses the explosion release fist, if he uses it at all, do you think it will give a sort of edge for him in the fight, or do you think it will still end in sort of a tie? Thanks. So I think he will use it. Somebody's got to use it, right? Because it was name dropped here, and I don't think it's just going to be Garo using it. So I think once Garo like snaps out of the feral state that he has been in, because we see his eyes cracking at the end of the previous chapter, I think he'll probably continue to fight Bang, but he's going to be much stronger, just like he was with Darkshine. Like once he came to, he started to like slowly dominate Darkshine, and I assume the same thing is going to happen here with Bang. Maybe Bang is forced to use Explosion Release Fist, but at that point it seems like maybe it won't even matter. Samurai asks, now I know Star can't beat Shigaraki due to narrative and whatnot, but what if she takes away her super strength rule and applies 2 rules to each Shigaraki and All for One that either of their hearts will stop, or something like that? Now she can certainly do that, but it doesn't seem like it would matter, because if it did, then Shigaraki's consciousness would have died when she made that rule originally, right? So it seems like her quirk doesn't affect the vestige world. So that's how it's getting around this. And in order for her quirk to work, she has to like literally name the person that is in front of her, which technically doesn't have a name, I guess, unless they identify themselves. So there's no way that she could know the name, unless she can make a rule that's like, I know the name of this person, but I don't know if it could go that far. Nate Dog asks, what do you want to see from Star and Stripe? I think it would be cool if she realizes she's about to lose, she gets rid of super strength and replaces it with super speed and zips out of there. That would be pretty cool, and yes, she could totally do that. I don't see why not. And I'd also like to see how far she can go with her abilities, but unfortunately I don't think we're going to see much more of her and her use of it, because Shigaraki / All For One is going to take it, in my opinion. So then it ultimately comes down to like, what are they going to do with it? And that's what I've been wondering for a while now, and I really don't know, because they can almost literally do anything. Extinction Team 75 asks, who do you believe will win in a match between Lightning Max and Tenya Ida? So probably Lightning Max. The One Punch Man world and power scale is much higher than the My Hero world, and Lightning Max like fought against Deep Sea King and lived. So I think just by virtue of that, he would probably be able to defeat Ida, who I think would probably die instantly if he were to fight Deep Sea King. Sean H asks, if you could have any Bankai / Resurrection, what would you choose? So that's as equally awesome as it is a difficult question. So I could just break this question here and be like, yeah, I want Aizen's Bankai, but I know that isn't fair, so instead I'll take Ukiura's Resurrection. Samurai asks, is Blast stronger than Syrochi, and is he definitively god level? So I don't think we'll ever definitively know if Blast is god level, because he's a hero and they don't get the disaster level info boxes. So unless Blast turns heel or becomes a monster or a villain or something like that, then, you know, in that case he would get a disaster level info box, and that would be amazing actually if Blast turns heel, and it seems like, you know, there's a possibility he has that in him. But other than that, I guess he'd have to defeat someone who does have the disaster level god info box, and in my opinion, I think we'd be very lucky if we get more than one character who has that in the series. And that being said, that's for Saitama to defeat and probably not Blast. So it's likely we'll never know if he is truly god level or not. But as a community, we could just do what we always do and just look at his feats and just decide upon ourselves if he is a certain level or not. So I'm sure at full power, Blast is probably god level. I mean, why not? I mean, his feats against Flashy Flash are insane, and he wasn't even trying at all. And Flashy Flash is like, you know, one of the strongest high dragons, and speed is like his thing. And Blast just nonchalantly made him sweat in fear. So if he's not god level at full power, then I really don't know what is, you know, outside of God himself. And that makes me think that there's already the hierarchy of disaster level god being set up. Like maybe Blast is like low god or something, and then God is like high god maybe. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. This is like years in advance stuff. But anyway, he's for sure stronger than Syrochi, also because Tatsumaki at full power probably could have defeated her. And Tatsumaki is second to Blast for multiple reasons, none of which I think Tatsumaki would argue with. Not to mention, just outside of her going against Syrochi, Tatsumaki herself is an insane above dragon powerhouse. So it's not a surprise that if there was anyone above her, they would be god level, right? And also, we've never really seen anyone else use the kind of abilities that Blast has. I mean, I guess God comes close. It's even possible that these originate from God, but that's a video for another time. I may have already made a video about that. But just these insane casual time and space warping feats that we've seen of Blast, imagine what his full power is. And also, you know, we can't forget about his history. You know, he soloed Eller Centipede. He defeated the ninja leader, who I'm thinking is going to be much stronger in the manga. And he has like this ongoing beef with God. It's really impressive. So my money is on him being like straight up God level, if there ever was one. So for Josh H and Nate Dogg's questions, they kind of asked the same thing, so I'm going to group them together. And it regards All For One / Shigaraki getting Star and Stripe Stripe's quirk and what he could be doing with it. So Josh asked, what if Shigaraki put a rule on All Might using New Order, saying that his heart will stop if he were to save someone, but he decides to save someone anyway and dies? And Nate Dogg asked, what if All For One used New Order to make a rule giving himself immortality? And before I go into it, let me say this is what I was talking about in my 330 and 331 videos about the possibility of All For One getting New Order leads to like unlimited possibilities. With how nuanced and open-ended the New Order quirk is, it leads to all of these possibilities. So I think these two right here are very possible for sure, but I think if Shigaraki does kill All Might, I don't think it will be this way, because Sir Night Eye said that it was going to be like a gruesome, unspeakably horrible death or whatever. I'm paraphrasing, but like something really bad, and it doesn't seem like this is fitting that description. So it is possible that he uses a rule on All Might with New Order, but it would just have to lead to some kind of gruesome death. Then as for All For One giving himself immortality with New Order, maybe he could do something like that, but I don't think it's going to be full-blown immortality, because what exactly does that mean? Does that mean like if the planet exploded that he'd be okay and he'd like exist in space and he doesn't need to eat or anything? I don't think it's going to go that far, because when Star Stripe asked for super strength, only took her so far. She didn't even become as strong as All Might. So I think the same thing would happen if he were to ask for immortality, if it could even give him that, or some semblance of it. Garrett M asks, what's your favorite anime theme opening? Mine's is Kakai Kitan, Jujutsu Kaisen's first OP, but Unravel from Tokyo Ghoul is up there. So yeah, Kakai Kitan is awesome, but my personal favorite is What's Up People, the second opening of Death Note. Such a good song, and it still holds up to this day. Just that band in general, just Maximum the Hormone in general, that band is pretty solid. Sean H asks, what is a battle manga setting that is overdue to be explored in your opinion? So America, and I know it's been visited from time to time in multiple series, but I want like a battle manga in Jump that takes place in America and all of the characters are American. I mean, come on, why not? I mean, they speak Japanese, of course. It's like America where they speak Japanese and read and write Japanese, but there's like occasionally decoration English places. Del Monte asks, what would happen if Roger in his prime and his crew in their prime, including Odin, replaced Whitebeard at Marineford? So they for sure would have saved Ace. I mean, Whitebeard and his crew, despite their lack of abilities and numbers, they pretty much successfully saved Ace. It was just Ace that led to Ace's death. I mean, I know Akainu did the deed, but Ace killed Ace in the end. So Roger for sure would have did it, and if you're wondering like could they have defeated the Marine forces, well, that's a question for another time, but probably. So I'm also going to group these two questions together because Little Ferrari and L both asked the same thing about Atomic using the Sunblade with the Atomic Slash, and he actually does use the Atomic Slash with the Sunblade against Homeless Emperor's Spirit Bomb, so he is capable of doing it, but maybe he can only do it once or something because of the stamina or the vitality requirement or whatever's going on with his relationship with that sword. But as for him hitting Golden S with it, not really sure if it would take him out, because if you'll look when he's hitting him in the forearm, it seems like there was a few other slashes that hit him on the way down, but they didn't really pierce him the way that it is on his forearm. So maybe it's like an effort thing, like maybe he has to concentrate one like hard singular slash on him for it to like pierce him. So it's like a quality over quantity thing. Although granted, we don't see him directly hit him with an Atomic Slash, so we don't know the answer yet, but maybe that could give us some clues to what it could be. I mean, maybe he could just straight up take him out with it, or maybe, like I said, he needs to do the wiggly sword stuff or just one hard slash.
Hey, if you made it this far, maybe you'd be interested in following me on Twitter. I talk about all of the new battle anime and manga stuff and all the spoilers and pop culture things as well. So if that sounds like something interesting to you, please check out my Twitter. The link is in the description. Thanks, guys.
Mateo asks, do you think Star and Stripe will have a quirk awakening since she has a flashback of her comrades from the military because of how much support she received from them just before Shigaraki touches her head for stealing her quirk? So this is a possibility, I suppose, because I was talking about in my video for this chapter about just the possibilities in general of what she could be doing to save herself from getting hijacked by Shigaraki here or just getting destroyed altogether. together. And I was saying that maybe she can make like a last second rule that maybe completely disables New Order or just removes it all together. Maybe she can make a rule that says my quirk factor will disintegrate or something like that. Because that's what it ultimately comes down to, right? And that's how Aizawa's quirk works, like it targets your quirk factor. So it could be that, or some kind of rule to where her quirk cannot be taken in that moment, or she just tries to completely take herself out altogether. But either way, I don't think that these options will happen because Shigaraki kind of needs to take New Order here, you know, because it would kind of be a waste of time if he does. Like, don't get me wrong, this fight is amazing, maybe the best in the series so far. But if it ends with him not getting New Order, then I'm just confused as to the purpose of this, other than just it being a cool fight and Star jobbing to Shigaraki so that we know how powerful he is, which we already kind of knew. So I'm pretty sure this will end with him getting that quirk. So I guess it's more of a possibility that she could like awaken it here rather than the quirk, you know, being destroyed or something. And that brings us to the question of like, what could her awakening even be? Because we already barely have an understanding of what just her base quirk could do in general. So now we're coming to the next level of something that we don't fully understand. So I assume that like instead of giving her a whole new set of abilities or a new ability, it'll just expand upon what she currently can do. Because you know, Horikoshi has been going out of his way to establish how this quirk works and how it doesn't. And a couple chapters back, we had like that barometer of power showing us that it more so has power over weakening something than strengthening it. Which brings me back to why it would probably be possible for her to just completely destroy the quirk itself, kind of like how you can write a program to delete itself. But with her hypothetical quirk awakening here, maybe the barometer or the meter could be moved completely to both ends of the spectrum, meaning that she could just fully weaken or strengthen something like she wouldn't be able to otherwise. And then, you know, further in this situation, Shigaraki would be taking said awakened New Order here, so now he has access to that. So it just seems like it would cause maybe more problems than it's worth. So I don't expect quirk awakening here, although like I said, it is a possibility, but seems a little superfluous at this point since it already is overpowered, and I guess it already is bringing enough complications with it as it is. But it would be cool, of course, and I'd like to see it. Why not? Joseph O asks, do you believe that the final battle will come down to Deku or Shigaraki trying to get their quirks off first and then a battle of wills meant? So I don't think so. I think it'll be similar to maybe what we saw in the war between them, where they're having like the standard final shonen battle between the protagonist and antagonist. And I'm not saying it's going to be formulaic or anything. It's going to be great. Horikoshi usually almost always delivers, but I think it'll be a simultaneous physical battle and a battle of wills, like what you're saying here. I don't think they're going to be taking turns or there's going to be like separate rounds where these can be decided. I think it's going to encompass everything in this one last fight, but more of the talking element, because surprisingly there wasn't as much as you think there would have been in their war fight. Sean H asks, have you heard of Hell's Paradise? It's commonly put into a trio alongside Chainsaw Man and JJK. It's a finished series and it's getting an anime sometimes next year, and I was wondering if you'd make a review of it when it does. So I haven't heard of this, and I looked it up and I read the summary and I saw some of the art and it looks good. And if it does get its anime and the anime gets some traction, then I for sure will check it out and review it. But I don't want to make any promises. It's really predicated on its potential popularity. Delamonte asks, who is one human fighter that you would like to see fight for mankind and one god you would like to see fight for gods not introduced in Record of Ragnarok? So this is a great question, and I'd like to see for the humans like George Washington or Teddy Roosevelt fight, and like their Volan could be like an American flag spear or something like that. And as for the gods, I'd like to see like Sumerian gods step in, maybe more so like the Sumerian demons like Azog or something like that. I think that'd be really cool. Samurai asks, does War Arc Deku have what it takes to defeat the USJ Nomu, and if no, does current manga Deku? So I think maybe it's too soon for either of them to take down the USJ Nomu, and maybe Horikoshi would disagree with that, but if we're like looking at it on the page and like, in the episode itself, I still don't think current Deku has enough of a shot to take down the USJ Nomu. I mean, he could go 100% and trade some blows like we saw against Shigaraki in the war, but the amount of effort that All Might had to put in to take care of the USJ Nomu, especially with like his foil quirk set, I just don't think currently Deku could replicate what we saw All Might do. And USJ. I could be wrong, but it just doesn't seem like that right now. Maybe with the Eri rewind hacks he could. Jimmy P asks, do you think that Blast is a descendant of the entity god, and that's where his abilities possibly come from? So I've made a few videos about this actually. You can check out this video if you haven't seen it yet, but I do think that there's a possibility that Blast is somehow related to God, or his powers come from him in some way, you know, because of the cube stuff and because God knows Blast by name, and also, you know, how Blast's powers are very peculiar. So I wouldn't be surprised if maybe he touched the cube one day and almost made a deal with God, or made a deal with God and somehow figured out how to get out of the confiscation aspect of it, or somehow to not be subservient to him. That's always a possibility, but I don't think he's related to God, because God doesn't seem like someone who can like have children, or at least biologically the way that we do. If he does have some kind of offspring, it seems like he would just like create them like some kind of Marvel cosmic being would. But I wouldn't be surprised if Blast's abilities have something to do with God, because, you know, like you pointed out, and like I point out in my other videos, it's probably intentional, the similarities between him and the Homeless Emperor in those panels. Little Ferrari asks, if you had the opportunity to meet one famous person, who would it be and why? So probably one, or Oda, so I can just ask them questions. But to be honest, I'm a little hesitant on meeting like famous people or people that I look up to or follow or respect or whatever, because, you know, that age-old saying, don't meet your heroes, and it seems to be true because, you know, with social media nowadays and everything, you're hearing more and more stories of people meeting famous people or whatever, and it turns out that, you know, they're kind of jerks or whatever. So maybe it's probably better to keep our healthy parasocial relationships that we have with famous people, you know, unless you just randomly meet them somehow organically, then that's a different story. But I wouldn't go out of my way to meet someone famous, unless it was like Oda or one, like I said. They probably don't want to meet me, and definitely don't want to hear me fanboy out in front of them and ask them questions that they've already heard a million times before. Professor asks, what could be the ultimate goal of Rewind for the end game of the series? So I do think that there is an ultimate goal for it, and it's possible that maybe Izuku winds up taking it from Eri and uses it to fix the series in some way. Now, I do think that there's a good chance that he might rewind Shigaraki back to being like Tenko, so therefore he is saved, but also it could be used to like save the world from the Quirk singularity in some way, because I do think it's ultimately going to come down to Deku saving everyone from that, and I am going to make a video about it soon. But either way, I just think it ultimately comes down to Izuku getting the rewind power, or just the rewind power being used for a substantial goal in the overall series. Little Ferrari asks, do you think we are only going to see Platinum S fight Awakened Garo, or do you think we'll actually see some feats from him? So first of all, I do think that a Platinum S is eventually going to go on to fight Awakened Garo, and by fight I mean like, I don't know how long it's going to last, because that's essentially what goes into making Awakened Garo. So like, he's not going to become Awakened Garo when he's fighting Bang, and speaking of that fight, I guess that has to wrap up. So probably the next time we come back to that, Garo is ready to move on to the next alpha. That's obviously going to be Platinum S, and Platinum S is either going to be a little or a lot stronger than Garo. Also, we have to remember that we saw like his eyes cracking the last time we saw him going against Bang, so I assume the shell is going to break off of him and he's going to regain his consciousness. So that means Platinum S will just fight fully self-aware Garo, but in his like current 85% monster form or whatever. And then through fighting Platinum S, which is going to be incredible, he's going to do the same thing that he did against Darkshine, where he's going to get stronger on the fly in order to overcome his opponent. And considering that Platinum S is implied to be maybe as strong as Meteoric Burst Boros at this point, I really have no idea, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's rivaling that. Then naturally, Garo will have to become Awakened Garo to match that, and that's how current Garo is going to ascend to that form. So how long is he going to fight Platinum S? I have no idea, because in the webcomic, Golden S's death is instantaneous, and before that, we don't even see the fight. We kind of just get like a far view Dragon Ball Z fight glance. I doubt One and Murata are going to do that to us with the manga. Before that, I do think that Platinum S is going to get some feats, because he kind of has to. They need to establish how powerful he is, of course. And I don't think all of the S-Class are necessarily going to job to him, because they're eventually going to job to Awaken Garo, and it would kind of be redundant at that point, right? So he might be the one that just completely takes out Vomited Fear Ugly, maybe. Or maybe he defeats Evil Natural Water instead of Saitama. I'm just thinking there has to be like a big fish for him to fry to really show us like how outrageous he is, because he is going to be outrageous. And I see a lot of you guys saying that, you know, it looks like he might be speed based, and I agree. Usually when they become slender like that and, you know, elongated, it usually indicates speed, or at least that's like the stereotype. And Awaken Garo is obviously like the speed lord, so I'm sure we're gonna get some awesome sequences. Missiel asks, or just let me know how you pronounce your name, but they want me to know which One Punch Man character that's missing on the battlefield right now I think is gonna come back soon. And I'll say Psychos for sure. Like, we saw that before Orochi was killed, she like evacuated his body. It was just one quick panel, but she's for sure gonna come back and have her like pivotal fight with Fubuki, because it's pivotal for Fubuki's development. And I think Psychos will eventually become like a good guy in the last arc. Mateo asks, have you ever thought or wanted to cover Black Clover? So I get asked about this a lot, and I'll do this much for you guys. On my second channel, Zodi Might, which I just made, please check it out. I'm gonna do a video on there where I review the first chapter of Black Clover. Basically gonna check it out, give you my first impression, and then we'll see where it goes from there. I don't know when I'm gonna make that, but it'll come out soon. And Delamonte pretty much asked the same thing about Baki, so I'll say the same to you, Delamonte. I promise that I eventually will make a video on my second channel where I review the first chapter of Baki, and then basically give you like my first impressions, and then I'll see where it goes from there. No promises, but maybe I'll do a review of the first season or the first arc or whatever. I mean, if it catches my interest enough, I'll just organically start covering, and just any series in general, especially if it becomes popular enough. Samurai asks, can you rank Mihawk, Odin, and Zoro? So right now, maybe Zoro is approaching Odin's level or is on it. I'm not really sure, but they kind of have similar feats against Kaido, right? And they both went against two different versions of Kaido, so it's like, whose is more impressive? Probably Zoro's, because it was an older, stronger, or at least implied to be stronger Kaido in his hybrid form, as where Odin kind of just did it when he was in his full-blown Dragon Zone form. But also there was kind of implications that maybe Odin could have like low diffed Kaido or something, maybe, because he for sure was going to take him out if Kaido didn't have, you know, the intervention with the Momonosuke trickery. So I don't know, I think it's still kind of ambiguous, to be honest, of who is stronger than who, or just what Odin's full strength is. Don't forget about his clashes with Whitebeard and Roger, or just Whitebeard, but they're both probably beneath Mihawk regardless. Sean H asks, I don't know if you're keeping up with Boruto, but could you say what the disaster level is of Ishiki and Naruto's Baryon modes? So I haven't been keeping up with Boruto. A couple months ago, I was like loosely keeping up with it. I kind of had a good idea what was going on. Like, I saw, like, you know, whenever a chapter came out, I would kind of get the cliff notes of it. But I haven't been keeping up with even that. So I have no idea what the disaster levels of these characters could be in these forms. But considering how far the power scale has come in the series, I would be surprised if they're like gods. You know, why not? Nico L asks, do you think New Order will eventually be passed on to Izuku towards the end of the series in the Vestige world? So I think it's very possible that that could happen, but it's kind of like implied that once Star has fully like decayed, then I guess she'll no longer have control over the New Order rule that she made for it to revolt against the other quirks. I mean, that would be cool if it's always like that, but that would kind of muddy All For One and Shigaraki's like final villain push. You know what I mean? I don't think that's going to be like a lasting dynamic, although it very well could be. But I wouldn't be surprised if eventually, like in the Vestige world, Izuku gains access to all of the All For One quirks, because I think that's eventually what's going to happen, and then maybe he meets the vestige of Star and Stripe there, because, you know, there's like a piece of you that gets embedded in your quirk or something. They're going to explore that more. Daddy Adam asks, Ultra Drip Stink Swaggerot versus every character who can use Ultra Instinct. So Swaggerot is pretty powerful, so I'm not clear on all of his feats. I assume they're not too far off from Goku's, but this would mean that he'd have to be stronger than the Grand Priest, which I guess Swaggerot
probably is, because he's just a variant of Goku, right? Like the strongest variant there is, or one of them. I don't know if he's stronger than El Hermano. And I guess the Pokemon are brainwashed in the Pokeballs because they would have to be subservient, otherwise they're just living in torture inside of those small cages. PFM18 asks, what changes would you like to see to Garo versus Saitama in the manga compared to the webcomic? To be honest, I don't really have any special requests that I don't think they're already going to do, like going to space and stuff like that. Not like interstellar space, but keeping around the level between the moon and the earth. But one of Murata would just steamroll over any idea I had anyway, so I have faith that they're going to deliver because they have a very high success rate with that. Boxteam asks, with the reveal of SSK King, how do you think a fight between him and Boros would go? So unfortunately, it's not looking good for Boros, and dare I say it, but the new wave motion cannon makes the collapsing star roaring cannon look wolf level in comparison. I'm sorry, I mean, I didn't do it. It was Murata, but yeah, it's not looking good for Boros right now. Like, not at all. Nate Dog asks, do you think Star and Stripe is going to be saved at the last minute, maybe with a team and Eri? I mean, I guess that's the only way to save her, right? Because she is decaying as we speak, and rewind immediately, I guess, is the only way to stop it. But unfortunately, no, I don't think there's going to be any Deus Ex Eri this time. I'm pretty positive Star is going to die here because she kind of has to. I mean, it would be less problematic for her to stick around in the story if she didn't have a quirk, which Horikoshi could have did, but it's probably better for her to go out on her shield because that's all she was ever supposed to be anyway. She's just a vessel to have the New Order quirk so Shigaraki can get it. All the other stuff is just an amazingly well-crafted, fun addition. Sean H. asks, do you think it's possible that if Deku was born with a quirk, that it was stolen by Dr. Yujiko and given to Shigaraki? I thought it could have been decay, meaning that was Deku's original quirk, but the timeline does not match up. But it does match up. See, currently Izuku is 16 and Shigaraki is 21, meaning they have a 5-year difference. And if we go back to when the decay quirk blooms in Shigaraki, it reveals that his age is 5. And it's also revealed later on in the series that quirks manifest by the age of 4. So considering that he's suddenly getting decay way after he's supposed to have developed his quirk originally, and also that means that Tenko, aka Shigaraki, was born quirkless. That's a giant red flag. Not to mention that at the beginning of that chapter, we see a man dropping him off at his house. A man who is wearing a suit and is tall and has a hat and his face is obscured, and he kind of looks like All For One, because it is All For One. Not confirmed yet, but in my opinion, this is absolutely him because he had found Tenko and gave him decay, then dropped him off at his house, and later that day it bloomed and led to the tragedy that created Shigaraki. But that begs the question of where did All For One get decay? So like I said, 5-year difference between them. Tenko developing this quirk when he is 5, so that lines up perfectly with a newborn Deku having a fresh quirk to be stolen, right? Keep in mind that this is even playing into the big popular theory about All For One being his dad. That's a whole other rabbit hole. This is just something tangentially related to that. So if we go back to chapter 1, we'll see the iconic reveal of Yujiko hiding in plain sight this whole time. It's obviously not a coincidence that he's there, and the one to specifically be delivering the information to Izuku that he is quirkless. But first, this video is sponsored by Extra Wallet. That's right, guys, my favorite sponsor is back, and that's because they're running a Black Friday sale right now with up to 40% off site-wide. That's a big deal, guys. So if you're waiting for a good opportunity to get an Extra Wallet, now's your chance. 40% is a lot. So now that I have a collection of these things, I can really give you a good breakdown. This is the first one I have, and I still love it, but I eventually got an upgrade to the aluminum model, which I still currently use, and that's because it's fantastic. But recently, I just got this bad boy, the Parliament. This is the most powerful one I've gotten so far, and it's so nice that I honestly don't even want to use it that much. Kind of like a special occasion type of thing. And like I said, I use these things literally every day. I love them so much. So guys, please check out Extra Wallets and their Black Friday sale that is currently going on, where you can get up to 40% off site-wide I have a nice affiliate link in the description for you to click on. Please check it out. Thanks, guys. So what I'm thinking this all means is that Izuku was likely born in that hospital. And for a very long time, since we know that Yujiko has that longevity quirk, he has been monitoring the newborns of that hospital. And whenever a newborn has a variant quirk or something like that, he'll take notice of it and then tell All For One, and then All For One will take it because it's obviously useful to them. And I say variant quirks because that's how Yujiko describes DK. And it being a variant quirk means that it's essentially just spontaneously came to be with the birth of that individual. Meaning that it wasn't like hereditarily passed down from one parent or is a combination of both parents' quirks. This kind of falls into the same tier as Rewind, or at least what Rewind is implied to be. So this could also be a cool little way to maybe connect Izuku and Eri more, since they both could possibly have been born with variant quirks, which led to the death of families, such as, Eri's, and, obviously with Tenko's case, the Shimura's. But anyway, hypothetically, Izuku is born with the decay variant quirk just randomly, catches Yujiko's attention, and he has All For One take it. So All For One takes this new variant quirk, and he's like, oh my god, this is perfect. I can give this to Tenko, the grandson of Nana, who I have been monitoring because I'm trying to nurture him to become the future Symbol of Fear's vessel. So if I give him this decay quirk, he can accidentally decay his family, therefore have enough emotional trauma to break him and become my servant so I can build him back up. Extinction Team 75 asks, if a student from My Hero had the ability to intern with an S-Class hero for One Punch Man, who would you like to see intern with who? So I'd really like to see Bakugo intern with Bang, because I think Bang would probably see Garo in him. I mean, I personally do to some extent, so Bang would definitely know how to deal with him and how to train him, and I would love to see that because obviously the interactions would be amazing, but the end result of Bakugo, not mastering the water stream, but having some of it implemented into him, that's just like pure fan fiction gold. Delamonte asked, if Mihawk joined Shank's crew, do you think they'd be the strongest crew in the world, including the Marines? So when you say including the Marines, are you also lumping in the world government there? Because you kind of have to, and if that's the case, then I'd say no. They for sure be the strongest pirate crew, but I don't think they're surpassing the Gorosei and Eam. Garuda asks, do you think Kuma will ever be / can be restored? Assuming he's not dead, of course. I think to some extent he will for sure. It's kind of been being set up that way. It would be anticlimactic and kind of un-Oda-like if Kuma just has like this weird tragic ending, despite giving us some glimmer of hope that he might have some kind of comeback, because revolutionaries did go there to save him specifically, right? And I wouldn't be surprised if once Vegapunk is revealed, he probably has like a hard drive with Kuma's personality on there, and then he could just give it back to him or something. Mateo asks, in chapter 334 of My Hero, in the All For One Vestige world, we see Tenko being held by the hands. And considering that part of the consciousness is contained within the quirk factor, do you think this could represent the original quirk that Tenko was supposed to have before decay? I don't think so, because I do think that Tenko was born quirkless, so this probably isn't a remnant of his original quirk factor, but more so a remnant of his innocence that was embedded into the decay quirk factor, like as soon as he got it, before he killed his family, you know what I mean? Or it could be after he killed his family. Not exactly sure about the timeline here, but I do think that this represents like the true Shigaraki, because Shigaraki is not Shigaraki, he's Tenko Shimura. Shigaraki is All For One's name. So you know what I mean? Like, the person that we have come to know, his true form is the little kid Tenko Shimura, and I think that's what this is representing. Will Terrio end up on Ground Zero like the webcomic? If so, how could he end up there? That's a great question, and I'm not really sure right now, but he has. Like, I for sure think that's going to happen because he needs to be there at the very end for Garo's like final redemption and to give him a reason to like distract the S-Class heroes so he can run away. I do think that's pretty much 1-for-1 going to happen in the manga's continuity. I don't see why not, and considering that Terrio and Garo's relationship has been built up way more in the manga than the webcomic, I think this for sure is going to happen. So, one way or another, expect Terrio to come back. Little Ferrari asks, in your Dragon Ball Super Chapter 78 review, you said you think Goku might obtain a new form, possibly something Bardock has. So before I go any further, let me just say that I was stressing in that video that it would be some kind of ability and that a form was possible if it wasn't an ability. Your question here really hinges on you thinking that I was banking on it to be a new form, but that's just not a case. I thought it was going to be like an ability if it was going to be anything. And then secondary like a form, meaning that it could be something that complements Ultra Instinct rather than replacing it. That's why I was talking about Bardock's clairvoyance ability, because that could play into like enhancing the whole Ultra Instinct thing, the dodging and dipping and the thinking and the moving without thinking stuff. Imagine if he could do that in combination with Foresight. It would be like Ultra Instinct with observation haki from One Piece, and would be a logical next step in Goku's power progression, but it ultimately depends if Toriyama wants to take it there or even has the thought process of taking it there, you know what I mean?